You're listening to the Real Women in Business podcast. I'm your host, Cass McCrory, and in this podcast, we highlight women in all kinds of businesses. For yourself, someone else, full-time, part-time, overtime hustle, together we will learn from and with one another. And if we get it right, it'll lift us all. Let's get into it. Friends, I'm so excited to introduce you to my coach, Jenn. She's amazing. In this conversation, we talk about the definition of rhythm, and it's going to unlock some major things for you. We also talk about the benefits of syncing to the moon's phases and what's there for us to really unlock and get into, how there is really just two reactions we have to anything new. And that was a really interesting piece of this conversation that I'm going to need to sit with because I think there's so much truth in it and I never considered it. I cannot wait for you to listen and react and follow along with Jenn as she continues on in her work. Jenn, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, what a joy. Thank you so much for having me.
I will just ask you to say, a little bit about who you are and what you do in this world.
Sure. So my name is Jennifer Racioppi, and I am a coach and an astrologer, and I work with women, mostly women entrepreneurs, on how to maximize their lives from living in sync with who they really are through the lens of astrology, through the lens of positive psychology coaching, and manage productivity in a way that doesn't lead to burnout. So what that means is utilizing authentic strengths and really syncing with the cycles of the cosmos through the lens of astrology to be in sync with what I've coined the rhythm of success.
Which is just brilliant. And I have found it to be beyond powerful in my own life. And I have come to depend and lean on you and your guidance and just your approach to things so much. I'd love for you to share a little bit about kind of how you even got into this work, because it's a really powerful story.
Yeah. So, my entry into this work really began in a personal health crisis over 20 years ago. I had, just growing up, really just never really had a great relationship with my body, mostly my female reproductive cycle. My period was just horrific in my teen years. And it just led me down a path of resenting my gender and not really knowing how to live in my body. And I was a high achieving high school kid who was always on the verge of burnout and in depression. But I was also just dealing with some really intense physiological ramifications of having disordered menstrual rhythms. And by the time I had graduated high school, it had just been just about 6 weeks after I graduated high school, I had a tumor the size of a bowling ball erupt in my left ovary, which brought me into an emergency situation at the hospital where, I was given a surgery. I ended up having a tumor removed. And like I said, it was the size of a bowling ball, as well as with my left ovary and fallopian tube. And within a week had been given a stage 1 ovarian cancer diagnosis, which was ultimately rescinded. And I was put under surveillance, like really close surveillance, because my doctors didn't know what was going on with me. And I was watched closely for about a year. It was just unclear at the time. And in a year's time, I was re-diagnosed with cancer, endometrial cancer, a very aggressive endometrial cancer. And I was treated with radical hysterectomy, which is the removal of both ovaries. My second ovary was removed. My second fallopian tube was removed, as well as my uterus and my cervix. And it launched me into menopause at the age of 19. And I really had no context for what menopause was. No one really talked to me about it. Obviously I knew I wouldn't be able to have kids, but I didn't know that there would be this whole hormonal fallout from losing my other ovary and my menstrual cycle. And so it pretty much devastated me. It devastated me emotionally, psychologically, and I really had no language as to why, and everyone around me was like, well, you survived cancer. That should be really exciting on some level. And it just wasn't. I became very depressed. I had a lot of anxiety, a ton of panic attacks. I had clinical anxiety and depression. And it sent me on a a pretty crazy journey trying to find answers, because I had already been to the best of the best in the Ivy League, and I had been seeking medical assistance since I was 14, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And the medical establishment just consistently treated me with the pill and antidepressants. And now I was postmenopause, and I was on Premarin, and they were still giving me antidepressants. So it was like the same thing over again. But I was getting worse, not better, psychologically, emotionally, physically. It got to the point where I actually had to drop out of college because I was just incapable of maintaining. And I went on a multi-year journey. I really traveled the world. This was the late 90s, early 2000s. There was no internet. I barely had email. I mean, there was internet, but it wasn't like it is. There wasn't a blogosphere. And so I really had to travel to find answers and meet healers and learn things. The wellness scene had yet to explode the way it has in subsequent decades. And so that was my journey, was to just help myself heal. And it brought me to a lot of places: yoga, meditation, green juice, chiropractic care, acupuncture, tarot. But ultimately, I met a healer in Lake Tahoe in 2001 who was a priestess, and she took me under her wing to teach me the art of lunar ceremony. And I started really working with the moon's phases. And then, so for those of you who don't know, the moon goes through a cycle every single month, from new to full, back to new again. And this same rhythm it mirrors the female reproductive rhythm of moving from a menstrual cycle through a follicular phase to an ovulatory phase, back if no pregnancy doesn't happen, through a luteal phase, back to new. And that same rhythm is the new to waxing moon, to full moon, to waning moon. They have almost identical properties and almost identical rhythms. And so what I had learned is that, I never really had this rhythm because I never had a healthy cycle. But when I lost my uterus and ovaries completely, I flatlined emotionally in many ways. And I had trauma, of course, associated with that. But I didn't have a cycle at all. And what I learned by starting to tie my life to the moon's phases was that I could go outside of myself to replace the cycle. In fact, the moon cycle was the same as a healthy hormonal cycle. So I could basically start to lean into the moon as a way to begin to cycle. And that was really exciting. It helped me so much. It helped me in many facets of my life. I was financially independent, putting myself through college at a very vulnerable time, and starting to take on this practice opened me up emotionally, psychologically, but also helped me learn how to just be in the world materially, believe it or not, and take care of needs. And so, that was 2001 when that happened. And I just this became my spiritual practice. I had a long road ahead of me. I still had to graduate college and find my professional path. But many years later, I found myself working my way up the corporate ladder in, one of the world's most prestigious global consulting firms in business. And I took a look around, and it was just very clear to me that the corporate life wasn't going to offer me what I needed to be in integrity with my healing journey. And I knew how precarious my body and my health could be from my previous experiences. And I just got this rip-roaring clarity that I wanted to leave corporate and help high-performing women continue to be high-performing without, falling into the health crisis that I saw so many of my colleagues in corporate suffer from burnout, overwhelm, not being satisfied or happy, always feeling on the go, always feeling behind. And that was in 2008 or 2009. And so I got to work, and I got a coaching credential and did a lot of other training, and slowly began to build my business.
I just want to hold a little space for how just amazing that is. And thank you for sharing it so clearly and just vulnerably, because there's a lot that happened to you. And I think one of the things I've learned the most from you is what an amazing witness you are, not just to yourself, but to other people. And I just think there's so much value in that. So thank you for sharing all of that, because, probably no one else has had that exact experience. I think we can all have a moment where we can say, we've had challenging moments where we had to pull ourselves up and say, this is what we need to do next. And you did that.
Yeah, I think that that's really where we're at right now collectively as well. And certainly, so many women that I work with, and I'm sure you are working with or in contact with as well, is like we've just come to this point where it's time to change how we've been working, and how we're showing up, because collectively we are in a crisis. And, so much of my work is rooted in multiple fields, like positive psychology, integrative wellness, integrative medicine. Those are, that's really the science that I work with. And then also, my spirituality comes from so many different aspects, but I'm really rooted in astrology as well. And cosmically, environmentally, we're just at a turning point, and we're all being asked to rise. So resilience, the ability to be with what is exactly as it is, like we don't need to have rose-colored glasses on or be diehard optimists. We can see life exactly as it is, which is often not that encouraging, but we can meet it there and make it better anyway. And that's really the crux of my mission, is to help women become more resilient, and really people in general to become more resilient, so that we can rise in this really, really precious, crucial moment of our lives and our collective.
That's beautiful. You mentioned something, and I want to just dig into it a little bit more for how you see this playing out in your own work. You mentioned this idea of being in the corporate space. It just didn't feel like it was an integrity to your journey, in particular your health journey. How does being in integrity with your work look like today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, first of all, I will say, being an entrepreneur has given me so much opportunity to really create a workflow that works for me. So, things like I don't commute. I can, like this morning, for example, I woke up at 6. I did an hour or two of writing. I went to the gym. I ran a solid fast mile and did a little bit of weight training, and then did some yin yoga and came home and had my first client of the day. And that sort of work, I don't really believe in work-life balance as a concept. I really don't. But I'm using it in this moment is just to say, like, I have the opportunity to put me on my calendar, right? Like to put me in the calendar. Whereas when I worked in corporate, going to the gym at 9:30 was an impossibility. Like that was not a probability. If I wanted to wake up, bang out 2 hours of work before everyone else got there, and then just like disappear for 2 hours at between 9 and 11. Come on, that's not how. That's impossible. So that sort of thing is something I don't ever take for granted. But beyond that, in recent years, I'm back in the city now, in Manhattan, and I traditionally have lived in Brooklyn, and before that I was in San Francisco. So I've been in major cities for many, many years. But, I was able to move my life to a lake in Hudson Valley, where I lived exclusively for 2 years, and I've been up there pretty heavily for 5. And that sort of lifestyle adjustment of living somewhere remote, being able to run my entire business from anywhere in the world, really, and choosing where I most want to be, is a huge luxury. I've really settled into nature for a very long time. And just the idea that I could make all my meals from home. I've had some really tough times with my health, even in recent years, where I've had to cook a substantial amount of food for myself and be on not a strict diet, but a very specific protocol for my well-being, and just having a kitchen and being able to work at home and give myself lunch and dinner it just makes a huge difference. But beyond that, to live in a place that's uplifting and beautiful with fresh air, where there's really no industry and or jobs, because I'm creating my own company, I can do it anywhere. It's just a huge, huge, huge bonus. But I will also say, just to be totally transparent, that entrepreneurship is very stressful on other levels, and very challenging on other levels too. So entrepreneurship has given me a tremendous opportunity to really center my life around my health. It's let me put my health on the menu first, and then let my career layer in on top of it, rather than trying to fit health into a really full life. And I will forever be grateful for that. And consequently, entrepreneurship has also put stress on me in a way that I don't think traditional employment could. And so I just hold both ends. Entrepreneurship's a beautiful, wonderful, amazing thing. It's not a solution for job dissatisfaction. And ultimately, it comes with its own stress and challenges too.
I hear you. I hear you. I think, sometimes we look at there's the grass is greener thing, right? When you're working in corporate, you're like, oh gosh, all of the freedom and all of these things and entrepreneurship is amazing. And then you get to the place of entrepreneurship and you're like, wow, I have the pressure of doing everything. And wouldn't it be nice sometimes to just have somebody else say, do this, and then you're good. Like there's never enough. It's feeding an insatiable monster sometimes. If you do it well.
If you do it well. And also things like, like an accounting team or HR and like benefits and all that stuff. I'm like, wow, I really, that's a huge luxury. Or paid time off, holidays, these things that come in the corporate world. I wouldn't trade it. I'm really, really, really proud of my path, but my path is a spiritual calling. And I always say with entrepreneurship is that unless entrepreneurship is a true spiritual calling, and or you have a business model that is just really well suited for entrepreneurship, really, really be careful what you're choosing, because unless it's a spiritual calling and or you have a business model that's a slam dunk, it can be treacherous too. And I just say that because I'm all about resilience and being real.
You are. One of the things that you taught me that I'd love to just share is this idea of, creating containers for the work, whether that's, in a traditional employed situation or in entrepreneurship. It's just, are you creating containers for you to exist the way that you want to exist in this world? And you do that in your health. And I think you're an amazing model of that in business as well. But you teach that in really thoughtful ways. And I think I'd love for you to share about 2% improvement, because that was probably the biggest game changer shift in my entire life, is when she decided to deal with me.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. You bring these things to your client's life as a coach, and you just don't know what of all the things land. So that actually comes from my positive psychology training with Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar and Dr. Maria Serwa. And it comes from this idea of Kaizen change. And Kaizen change is, I believe, a Japanese phrase, which is just to say a little bit of change. And so often we, and I see this all the time. I see this morning, noon, and night. And I'm actually writing a book about it as we speak. Particularly when it comes to our health, we have this all or nothing idea of like, I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to be perfect. I'm going to go on this diet. I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to, take on this really aggressive protocol. And the truth of the matter is sometimes when we're aggressive, we do damage. And when we go all in, it's actually too much. I call it, being the velvet hammer versus the bull in the china shop. Like, to be a velvet hammer is to be really effective with a minimal amount of force. But a bull in a china shop, as we all know, and that image or that metaphor is these very delicate plates where we have a bull charging towards them where everything just shatters. And I think that when we are really aggressive and we're top down, we're changing everything now, or we have these high expectations for radical transformation, we don't understand that transformation is destruction. And oftentimes we're not strong enough for destruction. We're really needing to reconstitute ourselves and nourish ourselves, to have strength that enables us for forward momentum. And transformation is destruction. It's to destroy something to rebuild it. It's to transform it. And similar, like I would say, like when I was just doing strict health coaching, people would come to me and they would want to detox. But the reality was is they didn't need to stop eating, like on some juice detox or some master cleanse or, liver detox. What they actually needed was nourishment. They needed to eat more, not less. They were already not famished, but undernourished in really specific ways. And the same is true of productivity. Sometimes just making subtle and small shifts are the most powerful and profound shifts we can make. And so rather than imagining grand sweeping changes where our entire identity is going to shift as a result of accomplishing a big, hairy, audacious goal or something, it's like, what about if we were just 2% better? What if we were 2% more aligned? What if we were 2% more authentic? What if we were 2% more in integrity with our body's needs? What if we were in 2% more active? And these small, subtle shifts become really tangible to the ego, and rightfully so, because they don't require destruction. Destruction is really scary to the ego. But there's also this idea of, behavior changes are hard. They're very hard to make and sustain. They're hard for our neural pathways to rewire around a new reality. They're hard for our ego to identify with. They're just hard. But when we make it easy, by finding that Goldilocks position of like, what do we actually need? We can actually sustain the behavior a lot longer. So I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm on deadline for a book that won't be coming out for a very long time because traditional publishing is well paced. Let's say it that way. So it's not like I can tease a book or anything, but I will just say that from the process of writing, I've had these long stretches of time set aside to write. And they're wonderful to have because I have my calendar blocked off and I have time to write. But I have to say, they're anxiety provoking as well. My experience has been like 5 hours to write is a long time. And it was almost a scary amount of time. And those writing sessions weren't my most productive time. So what I've realized is like, what if I write for 5 minutes? What if I wake up in the morning and I just say, I'm going to write right away, right upon waking, I'm actually going to start writing and I'm going to write for 5 minutes. Those 5-minute sessions, that's such a small amount of time for my ego to wrap its head around. They actually stretch into these much more luxurious writing moments, not because I've set some expectation that they will, but because I warm up in a way that just is right. And there's no pressure. I've only said I'm going to write 5 minutes. So if I write 50 minutes, cool. But I'm committed to 5. And I just find that that's like a really, I don't want to say it's like a trick because I never end up just writing 5 minutes. It's always longer, but it's just this wonderful invitation that it can be small and short. And it's given way to my best writing so far in this process. And it really keeps me engaged in a way that, like, setting aside these longer periods of time to write, it was hard to get into the writing because I check out of it at the end. I wasn't, one of the hardest things about writing is coming back to it again and again and again and again. But what if we just stay in it, right? Rather than check out, because we're in these shorter moments with it. Anyway, so that's Kaizen change, 2%, 3%, 5% improvements, 10% improvements. What if our life would be 5% different in 6 months instead of radically, totally different?
It was such a game changer, and I use it all of the time, like literally. And I'd love to provide a couple of tactical ways that I use it because I think that they're really helpful.
Yes, please.
I think that, one of the big things is when I'm doing a test that I don't want to do, I know that I don't want to do it. And I can say to myself, okay, you don't want to do this thing. How could you make it even ever so slightly better? And almost always it involves adding something really simple, like adding in great sound doc or putting on a podcast, and it becomes really infinitely better than if I had just kind of committed to the suffering. I feel like the 2% improvement has released my commitment to suffering.
I love that. That's so good. It's so true, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a huge game changer, and it happens in work too. I'm in the middle of a call and I'm like, this sucks. And I know that it sucks. And everybody else on the call knows that it sucks too. We've all been on that conference call, right? And I've just started to say, you know what? This isn't feeling really good. How could we improve like the energy, the tonation, whatever in this call so that we can accomplish what we needed to accomplish today? Because it's not going to happen where we're at right now. And just inviting it, saying, I don't want to live in a way that doesn't feel good. And inviting it to be better in a very small way is so doable.
Yeah, it's totally different than saying like, all right, guys, this call isn't going well. Like let's scrap that, come back tomorrow, start again from the top down, or like, it's
right.
just like so damning. But rather than just say, right, rather than to be dramatic. And I guess that's what I love about the 1 or 2%. And this is, it's funny you mentioned that, because I think that what I've seen in my own self is that I can be dramatic, certainly I think it's a tendency all of us can relate to in some way, the part of ourselves that really attaches to the drama, like I'm going to make these broad sweeping changes, or this sucks so bad, right? Even that is like, that's an attachment to drama. 2% isn't dramatic. It's the opposite of drama, right?
Yeah.
But who wants more drama?
Nobody.
Nobody. I mean, unless you're going for a Tony, like check the drama at the door, please. I mean, and drama becomes addictive too, because it's another form of, I think, of avoidance or entertainment. And it's a shadow form of avoidance, or I guess all avoidance is shadow, but it's a shadow form of entertainment, at least, and there's enough dramatic things happening in the world. For me, productivity. If productivity in business can feel not dramatic, then I want that. That's the option I'm choosing.
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned the moon, and I have a feeling that we're going to have a bunch of listeners that have never really thought about the moon in a meaningful way, and the cyclical nature of it, and how it does mirror, and it is so feminine in nature. And I found, as I was pregnant for so long, I just was, I had so many children so consecutively, that having the rhythm of the moon was such an amazing dependence. And I'd love to know where you suggest people start if they've never considered the idea of the cycles of the moon and their own alignment to it. Where would you suggest somebody start?
Yeah, I mean, I think like just even sticking with the 2% theme, the 3% theme is like to just let yourself be curious, like just to be mildly curious. Oh, what are they talking about? I think so often when we hear things that we haven't heard of or haven't thought of, we have two reactions. Like, oh my God, I've been waiting my whole life to hear this. What are they talking about? I need to know everything now. Or shut down completely. Like, this is weird. What are they talking about? Out. And so I think on both ends of the spectrum, there are different examples of dramatic reactions. And I think with something like the moon, if you've never heard of it before and you're like, what are they talking about? Check in and say, is that the feeling of curiosity? Is that the feeling of repulsion? Is that the feeling of confusion and perplexity? What's the feeling that it even brings up? I think is a great place to start. And then, to get curious. Well, what are they talking about? And sure, I'm an astrologer. I can go into some astrological tidbits on the moon. I'm a women's health coach. I can talk about, the feminine rhythms. But I think just to bottom line it is to say we are rhythmic, sensitive, cyclical beings, right? our wake patterns in the morning and our sleep patterns at night are running on a circadian rhythm, which is in response to light coming through the sun that goes through the hypothalamus, and it actually operates our almost entire neuroendocrine system, this light dark cycle of morning and night. And all of our juicy daytime energy is a result of our evening restoration and nighttime sleep. And our adrenals function off of this. For those of you who don't know, the adrenals are these like little almond shaped, kind of like walnut shaped appendages to our kidneys, and they fire our cortisol and really are such important parts of our body in terms of maintaining stable energy. But I bring this all up to say that like this is a rhythm. It's a cycle. It happens in response to day and night. And we've biologically adapted to this for a survival mechanism. And, now there's even a field of science called circadian medicine. And it's really being looked at, how this rhythm is so central to our entire health, our physical body. So, just understanding where rhythmicity already exists innately in a way that we take it for granted is why I bring that up. I think that's a great place to start. To pay attention to the seasons, how you feel in the summer versus how you feel in the fall, how you feel when there's longer days and shorter nights versus longer nights and shorter days, to pay attention to the rhythm of the year, right? The time around January is very different than the time around July. And why? What does that feel like? They're polar opposites, right? And that's what rhythm is. Rhythm is opposites working in harmony with one another. And so when we talk about the moon has an infradian rhythm, which is to say a circadian is a 24-hour rhythm. Ultradian is maybe like a 90 to 120 minute rhythm, meaning like you do a little bit of work, you work for 2 hours. I really recommend getting a glass of water and going for a walk, right? It resets the ultradian rhythm. But then there's these longer rhythms known as infradian rhythms, which the moon falls under, the menstrual cycle falls under, and they can be much longer than a month. But for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to focus in on a monthly rhythm. It's a version of an infradian rhythm, and it's to say that there is a cycle in every month, like there's a cycle in every day. Like every day you wake up, your cortisol spikes to some degree. You do, if you're a man, your testosterone rises. But if you're a woman, you have a different hormonal rhythm altogether, and you activate your day and you mostly do until a certain hour, and then you relax and then you repeat, right? That's just a rhythm. And the same is true for our month, that there's these longer rhythms, and the moon's rhythm is one of which we could pay attention to, which is to say, much like January is a very different vibe than July, the new moon is a very different opportunity than the full moon. And the waxing moon is a very different opportunity than the waning moon. And to start to sensitize oneself to these nuances as it relates to lunar energy is another way to receive all sorts of benefits. So what are the benefits of syncing with the moon's phases? Well, in my experience of working, teaching this literally to thousands of women, is becoming more aware of your day-to-day needs, drawing novel distinctions in your day-to-day life. Like yesterday could feel like tomorrow, and the next day, but who wants to live Groundhog's Day? Every day is different. And part of being mindful is drawing mindful distinctions on a day-to-day basis and understanding the moon's impact. What phase is the moon in? What sign is the moon in? What time does the moon rise? What time does the moon set? That's different not every day, but generally speaking is shifting pretty quickly throughout the month. And to understand that the moon's proximity to Earth may or may not impact you, it may not have an impact on you at all, but it also may. It may have an impact on your sleep cycles. It may have an impact on your mood. It may have an impact on your menstrual rhythms. It may have an impact on your emotional state. It may have an impact on your creativity. It may have an impact on your libido. It may even have an impact on how hungry you are, right? On what your cravings are, on what you're desiring from a food standpoint. Some people really crave a lot of sugar at full moon. I've really come to understand that. And the bacteria in our bodies have circadian rhythms too. And it's a pretty far out conversation, but that the bacteria in your gut also may have a reaction to the moon that may have you craving weird foods maybe at the full moon. These are all nuances and subtleties that I think are very provocative. And most of the women I work with think are too. But for someone who's never really tuned into this, the invitation is to be curious and just be like, do I notice the shifting of the moon, or do I notice a shifting of the mood within me on a monthly basis? And is there a way I want to become more familiar with that cycle or rhythm? And I will end this one thought. My philosophy is success isn't a race, it's a rhythm. And the power of rhythmicity is that we don't really have willpower to the extent that we may think we do. But the beautiful thing is when we synchronize with rhythms that are external to ourselves and we entrain ourselves to be in correspondence with them, then willpower is less of a thing, because we have momentum that is synchronized. And to me, that's very relaxing. It can expedite momentum in ways that our willpower and our force, our might isn't on the hook for. And so I realize that may sound pretty far out, but the opportunity is to understand that these rhythms are happening whether we're aware of them or not, and they may or may not be impacting us in profound ways. But on the off chances that we are, and the off chances that we can leverage them to our advantage, it's just less work we have to do because we're synced into the cosmic rhythms that are guiding our life.
Amazing. So good. I wrote down so many notes in there. I think that just to underline like one piece of this that felt so true for me, I didn't need to know the validity as much as it sparked an invitation to really get curious about how I was operating. And it gave like a benchmark, like, okay, here's what you're going for here. Here's where are you more or less energetic at this full moon? How do you feel differently in this moment? And it was an invitation to pay better attention to myself. And with so many outside stimulus from business and family and work and life and everything that's happening in the world today, an invitation to be really centered on what you've got going on and saying, hey, how are you affected? Not just by, all of the various rhythms, but by the whole thing. Put it together. That invitation was really powerful, and I think changed so much about how I grew my business, how I grew my family. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we just talk about what a spiritual practice is the practice of tuning in. And there's so much more we could say about what constitutes a spiritual practice. But when we tune in, we're noticing our internal states, we're noticing our authentic voice, we're listening to ourselves, we're understanding what's happening in the environment around us. One of my big spiritual practices is listening to music. Now, I know many people would say that that's not a spiritual practice, it's an indulgence, so hear me out. When I listen to music, I really try to hear everything. I try to hear the production. I try to hear the layers. I try to hear who's playing what where, the intonation of the vocalist's voices, the lyrics, the intention, the meaning, the impact. Not all music is up to that challenge, but the music I choose to listen to tends to be complicated and complex. And to me, that's a spiritual practice because I'm really focused on hearing. And hearing, there's a difference between listening and hearing. When we can really hear, we know. And when we know, we trust. When we trust, that's when magic happens. And so, following the moon's phases, particularly in the beginning of the practice, is really just a practice of hearing. It's listening. It's tuning in. What am I feeling? Do I feel different today than I did yesterday? So it's the full moon. How do I feel in the full moon versus the new moon? You have to listen. It's a practice of attunement, right? And so the moon in that moment it's not like the moon's doing something or there's this causality because the moon's in this sign, it means this. It's acausal. It's not a causal relationship. What the causality is you listening. Right? It's like, oh, I'm paying attention. That means I'm receiving my own guidance or hearing what my body needs. And I'm not treating myself like the bull in the china shop. I'm becoming the velvet hammer because I can be soft and subtle and make these 2%, 5%, 10% changes, honor myself today because I need this versus yesterday I didn't know I need that. And cumulatively, that's a big deal. Right? Like how many people, like I just had a client today who, without giving too much for information, is just really going through an awakening around understanding who she is and what she needs. And it's radical. It's radical. That's a radical act. Yeah.
That's amazing. I could talk all day about this stuff, and I think I need to plan that in my future very soon. I'd love to ask some just fast-paced questions because I know there's so many things I could ask you about. But I'd love to know what tactical things you're doing right now that are bringing you great joy. I know you mentioned music. I'd love to know, like, which music are you listening to right now that is bringing you into like a spiritual place?
Oh, you want to talk about music? All right. So, I'm a big indie rock lover. We're in 2019. It's just like, I've been really analyzing this from an astrological perspective because there's so much good music coming out. I'm like, is it the Jupiter-Neptune square? Is it the fact that everyone's just dumping their music before we hit 2020? Because Lord knows that's going to be a very politically contentious year, of which it's going to be hard to make a lot of noise about art because the political landscape is going to be so loud. But I don't know really what it is. I think that there's some great aspects of it. I think it's the end of a decade. But there's just wonderful music coming out right now. One of my favorite bands, The National, just dropped a new album not that long ago. And it's a very complicated album. It's very different than the music they've put out before. It's they're typically, for those who don't know, it's pretty much like a dude band, like kind of like dude confessional lyrics, but really, really, really feminine in terms of how they build rhythm and harmony. And the rhythm section is just unbelievable. And the attention to detail with lyrics is really amazing. Like they've got incredible lyrics going on. So they've just been a band that I've been a huge fan of for a very long time. But their album that they just released, I Am Easy to Find, is different than anything they've ever put out before in that they brought in a lot of women's voices, and they're doing a lot with harmonies in a way that they just hadn't before. And then even the music architecture and the production's different. The rhythms, the patterning and the textures that they've created is just different than their previous albums. So I've just really been listening to that. I listen to a fair amount of classical music, a fair amount of jazz. I've recently been on a Chick Corea, like little tangent. And then, there's this rising star, I believe her name, is Billie Eilish. I think that's, if I'm saying it correctly. She's kind of like a phenom out of LA, which I'm sure everyone's heard of because she's like basically the most listened to musician on the planet right now, selling out huge venues for a 17-year-old. I think she's only 17, but her music is just jaw-dropping, beautiful. And, we live in a moment right now that's just ripe with creativity, and there's so much explosion around that. So I try to keep a listening practice as a daily thing. For a long time, I had a spiritual practice of listening to one album start to finish on a day. So I would get through an album a day. I think in the age of playlists, we listen to music in different ways than music's intended to be heard. And then we're also sucked into algorithms. So I try to be really intentional with listening to music as artists has laid it out, not just as like an algorithm's pumping it out. But yeah, there's that. I also just moved to Manhattan not that long ago, and so I'm exploring the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and it's gorgeous this time of year. There's Central Park and the Hudson River, and just miles and miles and miles and miles and miles of walking that is just insanely gorgeous. And then I have upstate where I spend quite a bit of time in hiking and walking as well, and making food and growing food, and I'm writing and learning so much all the time.
Amazing. What time are you waking up most days? I think you mentioned 6, but is that normal, or do you flow with that?
Right now I'm in a summer schedule. So as at the moment that we're recording this, we're in a full moon pre-solstice. And so we're in a waxing moon on our way to a full moon. So this is a pretty young, intense moment. I have found, and it might just be my book waking me up, but I typically sleep, back to like the luxury of being an entrepreneur. I don't wake up with an alarm clock. My body wakes me up pretty much regularly around 7:30 every single day. That's typically my wake up time. I go to bed probably around 11. I get a good solid 8.5 hours ish of sleep a night. I could really sleep 9 a night if I let myself. But 8.5, I'm pretty good. Recently, I've been maybe getting a little less. I've been waking up probably around 6 most days, just because I'm really excited to get up and get writing. And so I just naturally wake up and I do my thing. But I have a really entrained circadian rhythm. Kind of handles it for me.
Nice. Is there a particular tea or coffee that you are enjoying these days?
That I jam on? I upstate live really close to Harney and Sons, and they have this ginger oolong that's like, it's amazing. But I also am a huge coffee lover. I am so motivated by coffee. When I was in a really deep depression after my hysterectomy, I was living in San Francisco, and San Francisco is a city that has great coffee. And I had never been into coffee before. I think I was 21 at the time. I don't know. But I was really in it emotionally, and like really still working my way through some clinical anxiety and depression. And I remember discovering coffee, and I'm like, wait, what is this? This is amazing. And so, like, depression? Wait, I just found coffee, And so I have this very strong, fond relationship with coffee, because having been through really tough times emotionally and clinically, depression, coffee does this wonderful thing where it's actually as a counterbalance to depression for me, and there's studies on it how it can work that way. So me and coffee, we have a good relationship. I don't drink a ton of it by any means, but I do love a cup of coffee. In terms of types, I always go least harmful to the environment. So I do hand poured coffee at home, or I'll source coffee from really great coffee shops. But I guess I'm not as committed when it comes to coffee, because I just appreciate all of it.
I love that. I feel the same way. My affinity for coffee it's large. There's a lot of room for coffee in my life.
Yeah. So anyway, just to note on that, I've done a lot of research on it. It's like coffee good, coffee bad, and I think coffee has a lot of benefits. 1, it can act as an antidepressant. 2, it could stimulate creativity, growth. 3, it helps with performance when working out if you have like a little bit of caffeine. So there's all these off benefits. We do want to be mindful about how much coffee we're consuming, because it can be really bad for our bones. So the sweet spot, I think, is like don't ever exceed, and this is like a rule, so you guys do what you want to do. But my guideline for myself is like 3 cups of coffee is the max, because there's other studies that say 20 cups of coffee, and I think that as a woman that's really dangerous. So what is the actual sweet spot for a woman? And it's really 1 to 2, but if you are a coffee enthusiast. No more than 3 is my guideline on that as a health coach.
Okay. All right. I have just a couple more questions.
Go for it.
What is the book you give the most?
Oh, the book I give the most. That's a hard question because there's seasons for books, but the book I've been given the longest, like the book I've probably given the most just because it's been on my radar for the most amount of years, is the book called Your Heart's Desire by Sonia Choquette, which is a kind of like old school manifestation book. I think it was written in the late 90s. I forget, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. But this is one of those books that like literally jumped out at the shelf. I was in a bookstore with my mom when I was in college, and I didn't want to buy this book. I saw it and I was like, oh, that's nice. I'm not going to buy it. And it like literally fell off at me. And then I was like, nope, still not going to buy it. And then like the next day I was like, God, I got to go get that book. I don't know why, but I went and got the book, and the book like literally changed my life inside and out, upside down, many times over. And it's just a sweet book on how to really conjure and create a soul-driven life that is coming from your most authentic needs and desires. And it like came out way before The Secret and like all these other books that then made manifestation very trendy. So at the time it was a bit of an anomaly. But I just think because that book was so impactful to me and is such an easy, digestible, implementable book, and I've known about it for almost 19 years or so now. I've probably given it the most.
You recommended it to me, and I can say it was an amazing book, and it led me down so many other books that really inspired me. And yeah, I agree. Go get that book. We'll put it in the show notes. What can someone do to help you feel appreciated?
Me personally?
Yeah.
My love language is words of appreciation. So I'm definitely a verbal human being. Positive feedback, intimacy, deep conversations, listening. One of the things that I'm really jazzed up about right now is nurturing my relationships where people know how to listen to one another. I have a lot of I have a huge social network, really. There's a lot of people in my life. The people I most crave spending time with are people which can hold space for meaningful conversation. So I think just being present with someone is a way of showing respect and appreciation, and that it's just a way of being that I really crave and gravitate towards.
Nice. How can people continue to follow and learn from you?
Well, it's funny you ask. I'm not my business. I am right now just really enjoying Instagram. I'm on Instagram pretty much daily, sometimes not, but mostly daily. And I think that Instagram has been a really positive place for me. Like I just find it a fun. I like the audience there. I like the atmosphere that Instagram provides. So I'm on Instagram at Jenn Racioppi, and I have a blog at jenniferracioppi.com. I'm going to be doing the Moon Cycle Challenge in August, and that's a great way for people who are just interested in learning more about the moon to come aboard for one whole moon cycle. I'll guide you through it and help you journal it. It's free and it's super fun. So that'll be in August. Those are my spots: my blog, Instagram, the challenge.
Awesome. We'll link to all of that in the show notes. I hope that people do follow along, and thank you, Jenn. This was amazing. As always, I find myself so inspired, and I learned so much from every interaction with you, and it's so appreciated. Thank you for today.
Oh, well, you are amazing, my dear. And thank you for existing and doing this work. And you are a joy beyond belief. So thank you.